Welcome to IA Simplified. IA Simplified stands for Intelligent Automation Simplified, and it's an RPA Jargon Busters podcast series where we showcase industry experts to discuss the impact of intelligent automation on SME, mid-market financial services, healthcare, and other related fields. I'm your host, Tolani Jaitikalo, and on today's episode, we'll be discussing towards intelligent automation democratization, and we're going to be talking particularly around citizen development. So it's a very interesting topic, and I'm joined today by Pedro. Before I let Pedro talk about one or two things, Pedro is a citizen developer model program expert, everything about citizen developer. Pedro will be discussing with us today, and it's going to be a very interesting conversation because I've been following Pedro for a long time on LinkedIn. Pedro writes from the heart, and this is it's very rare for you to see people writing from the heart and not just talking about it from the generic perspective, but talking about it from experience and showing examples. And I've seen Pedro coin some terms which I'm going to talk about during our conversation. I think it's going to be a great conversation. So Pedro, welcome. Thanks for coming, and let's hear a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for making the time to have me here with you at IA Simplified. And as you already said, I'm actually someone who's been in the field of automation now for a while. The last 25 years I've spent in business transformation and system implementations in different roles, project management. I've been as well, leading efforts to really get democratization of technology going. And in my most recent role, I've been actually setting up a center of excellence for digital innovation and intelligent automation within the shared service center environment with one core goal, which was not only to have better process outcomes, but as well to be able to have a people-led technology approach in place so that we could really upskill our teams and activate them as well to participate and contribute to the digital transformation of the organization. I'm based out of Zurich, Switzerland, and in terms of heritage, Spanish with heritage, but Swiss from my mind.
I love that. But before we proceed, I want to talk about what you've been doing on LinkedIn. What you've been doing on LinkedIn has been very courageous, very interesting. The whole content around citizen developer, also about innovation, business transformation. There's a whole lot that you've been talking about in different snippets. And I think one thing that's also very interesting is the way you show examples of it, either through a diagram, either through a research report, something quite unique. What's your inspiration behind that?
Well, first of all, thank you for the kind words. And, I actually am someone who really am at a certain point in my career where sharing what I have learned and the knowledge which I've been gathering is really now important for me as well. So, what really motivates me is to be able to talk to people about impacts which we can actually achieve through technology, but as well with the lens to have people enabled alongside and being part of that. And so that for me is one of the key motivations for being on LinkedIn. At the same time, I'm discovering so many, experts and as well fellow LinkedIners who are in the same space, having thoughts which, maybe I can learn from myself or could actually connect with me in order to advance forward the agenda for people-led innovation or people-led citizen development in that sense. So I'm really inspired about the fact that I can reach people, and on the other hand, I can help others as well to come along the journey.
Brilliant. I love that. And LinkedIn is a very good tool for that, to reach different, demographics and different country geographical locations. So, which is really nice. And I think coming to our question today about citizen development, one thing that's been very interesting, when I heard that word for the first time, I was looking for the origin of that word because I knew that it would have come from somewhere or someone started with that word. And most times in our industry, it usually starts with research analyst. So there was something when I went back, as far back as 20, I think 2009. Is it 2009? There was actually the first mention of that was the first mention of a citizen developer, and this was by a senior research analyst as of that time at Gartner. He's still at Gartner, but he has a different position now. His name was Knipp. And Eric talked about citizen developer. As you may be aware, the whole citizen developer term has evolved into something, different from, the initial thought about what he had about citizen developer. People define it in different contexts. People talk about the responsibilities in different contexts. But before we talk about the responsibilities of, a typical citizen developer, I want to hear from you. How would you define a citizen developer?
And I think you're right. I think Eric defined it in a way which was appropriate for the time, right? At the time when he defined it, he really said that citizen developers are business users, so sitting outside of IT, which with low code and no code applications are able to develop solutions for themselves or for others to be consumed. And that has in itself changed quite a bit. And the changing factors since then have been, on one hand, the acceleration of digital transformation since 2009, right? We're looking now back at a fast track of digital transformation. At the same time, these tools, which you are talking about, these low code and no code tools, are nowadays much more widely available and much more simpler to learn. And on the other hand, we now have a workforce which is not solely digitally aware as he was seeing in 2009. Now we have people who are really actively, digitally accelerating the activities, right? They're hands-on trained to be able to then take forward activities with a low code, no code solution in a simpler manner. So from that perspective, a lot of things have changed. In my perspective, citizen development shouldn't just be boxed into the development part of citizen development in that sense, right? That is one of the core parts citizen development really entails. But for me, citizen developers are digital accelerators in their respective process domain, enabled to drive the change, identify innovation and improvement opportunities, and then through their skills, through their so-called low code or no code skills, be able to help themselves and others to improve their own working environment. And that is in line with IT, in line with a center of excellence, in order to make sure that things are orderly and secure.
That's a very interesting angle when you think about citizen developer. And I think it begs the question, how long has citizen developer been there? And I feel that it's beyond, 2009, if you ask me, because the plethora of technologies that have evolved from the 90s, it's been a lot that were very low code or no code nature. And especially if you look at Excel, for example, Excel is something that everyone uses, the Microsoft Excel, and people are writing macros within the enterprise, and they're you know used by business users, and they've learned over the years how to write macros. They've learned over the years how to interact with forms and all of these technologies, which is quite interesting. And when you look at how the technologies are available to business users now, it's completely different from what was available in the 90s.
Absolutely. And if you look at back into the 90s, as you're rightly saying, people were already doing these activities, right? They were learning Access, they were potentially learning SQL, they were bridging gaps, which IT couldn't fill at the time, in spaces where IT was maybe not prioritizing or not having an interest, and doing these activities for the sake of their teams, right? And I think you're absolutely right. It's not something brand new. It's an evolution. And now we're at the stage where we can really now connect the force and kind of the power of the citizen developer with, let's say, a robust IT structure and really get the best out of it.
Let's talk about some of the responsibilities of citizen developers. What do they actually do within enterprises?
So, if you think about the automation value chain and what could citizen developers potentially do there, right? In my opinion, citizen developers, besides their day job, they have a day job as well, right? They have a carved out time to help with ideation on where, citizen development opportunities, or rather process automation opportunities, could potentially be looked for. They are helping as well to validate these ideas by looking through process details with their process colleagues and their team colleagues. They're then able as well to document the let's say the processes or the tasks they're actually wanting to automate in a format which is then able to be solutions. And then what they're doing, if it is actually let's say an opportunity which is from a complexity perspective fitting with what they are doing in terms of well, capabilities or competencies, they would then obviously develop these solutions themselves. So across the value chain of automation, they would really be participating in most aspects, right? Ideation, qualification, and then in the development stage as well. What is important though is that they work quite tightly in combination with the Center of Excellence or in combination with IT in order to make sure that there's proper checkpoints as well for their, let's say, code, so that it is actually integer and it doesn't cause any harm when it goes live in production, right? So from my perspective, that is what they can contribute to, with obviously a big change component as well, because they're going to be talking to their colleagues about the benefits of automation. They're going to be as well evangelizing solutions. They're going to be references as well for their colleagues to call upon. And from that perspective, act as well as a first line of support for other citizen developers to help themselves in the community of practice.
Let's move on to the myths and the jargons around citizen development. And I
Sure.
think it's particularly interesting because people say quite a number of things just because they want to either make citizen development look very sexy, or some people say it just because they don't really understand the concept. And I think the first one I'd really like for you to touch on, I think I've seen you use this word, is citizen developer zombies. What does this really
Yeah.
mean?
And that sounds a bit gory, isn't it? I mean, it's a bit of a, interesting word combination. But the way I see that is that citizen developers are, in the best case, actively using their license, right? So they're actively evangelizing, they're actively developing solutions, and not only one time after their certification, but multiple times, so that they can really return on the benefits. So for me, a citizen developer zombie is really someone who's been passing training, who's been named as a citizen developer, has qualified, maybe got a certificate, as in my most recent experience, people had certificates and t-shirts and they were really, really proud, but they were no longer using their skills, and their skills were really outdating over time. And what then happened is the worst case, right? They were coming back to the centers of excellence and they were asking for support for solutions which were really in their remit of responsibilities, and really biting into the capacity of the center of excellence to really be focused on the priorities by serving them up, small scale solutions for the citizen developers. So this is what I call a citizen developer zombie. And what you want to do is really be quite selectful of the people you invite into that community, and at the same time have a commitment from leadership teams that these citizen developers have a carved out possibility from a time perspective to devote sufficiently their time to keeping their skills fresh, and at the same time work as well on solutions.
Here in Ireland, it's like 6 months for maternity leave. So
Wow.
you typically forget everything, and it's like you start all over again. But within that time, we've kept that license. That means that license wasn't even operational within that time, which is no fault of theirs, but it's just, situations and all that. And them coming back, it's like they're biting into capacity, they need some sort of support, and it could be very tough. And different organizations have different ways of dealing with all of this, but it's an interesting conversation, which in fairness I think people need to think about how they manage all of this, how they manage resourcing and all that. And I think the next question for you would be, citizen development creates shadow IT. Is this true or false?
Yeah, and this is a hotly debated field, right, Lani? I think this is as well gearing a lot of emotions for different reasons, I guess. But in my opinion, there's actually a true part to it, right? And this is, if it's done in a chaotic, unstructured manner, and you're having people out there, and you don't have transparency over what they do and how they do it, then you really are having a situation where I wouldn't really call it shadow IT, but it's a risky situation to deal with, right? On the other hand, I think it's false if you have a well set up program, and that is a program which has got all the premises set in order to make sure that there's proper governance in place. There is a center of excellence taking care of the standards and the governance mechanisms, and is ensuring as well that people are trained and are adhering as well to the activities which you have in your approach, and make sure that they come through with their checkpoints as well to consult you for validation of what they've done. So once you see that from that angle, I think the perspective changes slightly. What I think is important, though, to recognize is that if you look at what the citizens do from a complexity perspective, they're really dealing with tasks mostly, right? And in that spectrum, they're dealing with activities which IT would normally not touch, right? So from that perspective, they're really an important cog in the automation programs to advance and scale activities beyond just the larger bots into sections where first you would maybe do task automations, but over time you could then as well standardize processes, and with that as well stitch together all these small automations into something bigger as well. So from that perspective, a lot of companies are nowadays really looking into scaling. And from my point of view, looking at what citizens do, they are an important factor for that. But there's are as important as well from a champion perspective, helping as well with the changes which are needed in order to advance. So to avoid citizen development, shadow IT claims in that sense, I think it's really important that we're clear about guidelines, we're clear about the boundaries of what they can and cannot do, and there's always transparency as well on what they can work on and what they can't work on, and what is in the pipeline which they're currently having, in order to make sure that everyone has clear view of the assets which are getting created and utilized.
That's a very interesting angle. And I think the next one, which is going to be very tricky for you, is the conception. This is a misconception that citizen development can only be enabled through no-code technologies. And before you answer, um, RPA is not usually regarded as a no-code technology. I think it's been debunked a couple of times that it would never be no-code, just the way the technology is. But just touch on that. What's your view on that?
And there's different levels of no code, low code, right? As you are in kind of already insinuating in your question, right? But from my perspective, again, just coming back to what I was mentioning earlier, if you look at low complexity topics within the space of RPA, I think citizen developers with a light skill set in terms of, let's say, web scraping and being able on the UI to work with citizen development activities are probably going to get some way. But if you want to be obviously a bit more robust, you'll need to include as well code, and you'll need as well to be able to go a bit beyond that. And so what normally you would do in a citizen development program is start off first with a generic path of training, which would give people generic skills to deal with the complexities of a light solution, but then you would need to add on and enhance their skill set in order to add VBA, to add potentially as well skill sets such as Python into the solutions to have a more robust setup, and then be able with that as well to advance with the progression of their automations in a way which would as well, produce results which are a bit more mature in that sense, right? So I wouldn't say that it's completely no code. No, it isn't, because that's not where the solutions are currently at. There are some which claim they are no code, but in reality, you'll need people who are really interested as well in advancing their skills to coding, at least to a coding level, as you could expect from people which are interested in VBA or interested on a Python tool set as well.
There was a report from Automation Anywhere, and I think it's a yearly report. I think it's something that yearly, but it hasn't been done for a long time. It's called the Now and Next 2020. I think it was the Now and Next 2022 report for this year. And it was I think it was the report was based off of a survey that was done, and I think it was quite positive. I think I did narrow down into the citizen development region of the report, and I think there was something. Some of the stats there was 1,000 over 1,000 business respondents. There were over 1,000 business respondents, which is obviously it's very. I think it takes a different set of group of people, and there were 84% support the idea of citizen developers, which was up from 53% from last year, 2021, which was quite positive that in terms of how people are looking at citizen development. But in your opinion, do you share the same sentiment that there's an upward trend toward there's a high demand for citizen developers?
Well, there's probably two answers to your question, right? The first part of it really relates to this survey which you were just referencing, the Now and There survey, which was paused for the pandemics and now came back and was actually bringing back quite some interesting facts on intelligent automation overall. And it's really been proving that intelligent automation is here to stay, right? It's been helping organizations to build efficiencies and be resilient and create elasticity in their organization to overcome some of these challenges which the pandemic, but as well the current circumstances are really bringing. So now, if we consider that many of these companies who've been responding to the surveys, they're already 3+ years into their automation efforts, right? And they're overwhelmingly now as well confirming. I think 56% of them are confirming that they're scaling. It looks like citizen development is now the next priority thereafter, right? So from the perspective of the percentages you were just mentioning, it looks overwhelming, right? I think it's 80+% who are now saying citizen development is absolutely something I want to do. The main reason for that being is that they really want to now go after opportunities they potentially didn't really look at before, and they want to be now involving as well individuals of their teams into the efforts by having them contribute as well to their digital transformation activities. And if you recall the Boston Consulting report, which is cited many times, that 60 to 70% of all transformations, they actually fail because of cultural or adoption challenges. This is one of the areas where citizen developers are definitely making a difference. Once they're there, you'll see as well that other people in their teams will follow with their mindset. They'll be helping as well to evangelize digital technology, and will with that as well pave the path for other activities coming from top down.
Something about the reports that also caught my eye. I think it was about 37%, well, 30 decent enough, and they've emphasized that training citizen developers is like top 5 priorities. When you think about that kind of training, what are your first 1 to 3 steps? What do you think about training citizen developers?
Well, and I think in order to drive adoption, there's probably different personas you need to think about. There's not just a citizen developer persona, right? There are what I would be calling digital awareness needs as well in the organization, where you would have broad parts of the organization really requiring to understand what digital transformation, automation, and all of these good fancy buzzwords are about and what they're actually entailing and meaning for the organization. So in some organizations, this is actually quite an important factor of the democratization of technology. And with that as well, the hope to drive a digitally enabled organization forward, right? So having a broadband training from an awareness perspective is usually the first step organizations undertake. The second step would be then to identify who are these accelerators or citizen developers in that sense. People who are then going to have their hands in the cake, right? People who are going to build solutions, who are going to talk to other people around process opportunities, people who are going to be as well gelling their teams to the same idea of following through with the automation of activities where there's a lot of resistance and a lot of hesitance, as you can actually certainly read as well in a lot of the articles which are publicly available. So from the perspective of training needs, besides digital awareness, which is just broadband understanding of what the different technologies do, how they fit with the imperatives of the organization, and how they're going to enable better people and employee experience, which is at the ultimum what most organizations want to achieve. There is a need for a detailed digital accelerator training for citizen developers. And for the ones who want to go a step ahead, there could as well be a path which leads them then afterwards as well to a center of excellence, right? And if I look back into my journey in one of my last roles, I could see that we trained up a lot of citizen developers, but many of them, they had a key interest or they had discovered a talent for technology, which then led them to be part after that of a solution team or a technology team, or like in my case, the center of excellence. So I had then a recruitment pool available for talents, which then could actually come and complement the team with a good mix of knowledge and a network which we could then as well use for the activities moving forward. Now, maybe just one point to add here is that we shouldn't just look at technical skills, right? So if we're talking about learning paths and we're talking about citizen developers, we tend to really look just at the technical skill aspects. But if we want to really have a rounded persona, we should as well consider the factors which are relating to continuous improvement. So how do I identify if a process is really ripe for automation, or if a process needs something else before, for instance, standardization? And we need as well to think about soft skills in order to be able to coach other people and be able to help others as well to follow along or be supported as well during their own development activity.
When we talk about soft skills, I think soft skills is the most underrated skill set. And I tell you why, because the opposite of that spectrum is hard skills, which is overrated. When you're looking for a job, everyone emphasizes on the hard skills. But the fact is, what keeps you in that job is actually soft skills. the ability to communicate properly, the ability to, solve problems, the ability to, do so many things around that job. And that's what makes you a better person. And when we talk about some of these soft skills, can you list like a few that you think citizen developers need to have?
Yeah, look, and in terms of soft skills, we're actually putting citizen developers usually as well a little bit to the test, right? During our learning program, they have as well to demonstrate that they have a capability to talk to their colleagues, their team members, and as well their superiors and really sell their ideas, their capstone project, which they have as part of their learning path, and be able with that to demonstrate as well their skills in terms of communication, documentation, but then as well, kind of convincing and influencing others as well on their use case which they have. In addition to communication skills, which I was just mentioning, influencing skill, it's important as well that people have an open mindset of collaboration across boundaries, right? And I could say that this is one of the underrated skill sets as well from a soft skills perspective, right? So open collaboration, not just holding your skill set to yourself, which is something which we've seen in some of the developers sometimes, right? They want to be the masters. Not necessarily everyone wants to share, right? So it's really important that people are open as well to share their learnings, open as well to help others, and open as well to share their failures, right? And with that, have a common interest to learn together. In addition, I would say that if you think about coaching, right, they need to be able as well to coach their own leadership teams as well, right? They need to be able to go and talk to their superiors and one above and actually exemplify what automation could potentially do to them and be able with that to be that extended arm for the centers of excellence as well to build networks and connection with people who potentially need to still be brought into the program itself, right? So, as well, influencing skills, as I said, coaches for others, and as well having an open mindset for collaboration with a lot of grit and perseverance and follow through so that actually what they start at the very beginning is something they finish at the end, right?
Yes, perseverance is key. I think for everyone else, being able to persevere and still be passionate about something is really key, which is quite interesting. I've been thinking about a lot of training packs, and I think I'm beginning to see there's some industry trainings that are coming up, and I don't really know how effective they are. And I think that I've seen the one from PMI. About I think they had a learning pathway for citizen developers, but I don't know. Have you heard so much about them or the effectiveness of their program?
Well, there are various types of programs out there, right? So there are some programs which really are training people to become citizen developers, and that's by giving them tools, giving them approaches, methodologies to act in that role. And then there are other trainings which are much more focused on their technical skills, right? And here is where you have the classical academies of the vendors. I'm not going to name them right now. The RPA vendors, everyone knows, right? And this is where you would have as well availability of a lot of training material building up a path, right? And on the other hand, if you know Anders Jensen, Thomas Jansen, and all the folks on YouTube, there's a lot of material for there for citizen developers as well to learn from and as well act on. Now, if you want to really get to a program which is contextually working for the company you're in, you need to blend it, right? And this is what I've seen working best. And that means you need to set up a program which, on one hand, is helping people to acquire the necessary skills, the technical skills, the soft skills, the process improvement skills, right? Gives them a path which they can start with, but then over time as well, where they can advance and have progression as well moving forward, right? So that they can actually step up as well as complexity increases of their tasks. And that is requiring to be really in the context of the organization they're working in. So it doesn't quite work to have a citizen development program being let's say being trained on if it doesn't fit with the governance structure you may have, or it doesn't really fit with the learning approach you may follow for some other parts of your learning and development activities. It has to fit with the context of your organization, fit with the objectives, and like in the case we had in my most recent role, really be able to create a movement where others really want to follow, which you mentioned as well early on in the conversation as being an important factor to drive an automation mindset and culture.
I wouldn't do justice to citizen development, talking about citizen development, if I don't really talk about governance and procedures. I think this is something that is the con of citizen development, and this is what people tend to zoom in on, as opposed to the benefit of citizen development. They tend to talk about having, IT oversight, having some oversight over citizen development. And what's your take on that?
Well, I think governance and structure for me is the basis to really build trust, right? And if we're talking about citizen development, this is an area where you usually have some questions, right? Is it really working as it should? Are we not creating more risk? Is it actually going to create the benefits which you were just saying, which we're anticipating it will? So, from my perspective, having a sound governance and routine structure in place is fundamental, right? And this starts at the very beginning with being very clear about what it is citizen developers shall and shall not do. It then goes into triaging what are the different scopes of processes and task automation which are available, and who is going to then deal with what type of complexity, who can deal with attended versus unattended, who can touch the orchestrator, who cannot, who is actually then able as well to look into areas where there is internal control considerations or regulations. And what you'll find is that using a good decision tree will help you actually to get to that first answer, which is the funnel gets then pipelined through and gets triaged into what a citizen can do, what a COE could do, which is federated, and what potentially a central team could do if that is existing, right? So from that perspective, very important that in the governance structure, this is really being catered for so that there's clarity. On the other hand, as I mentioned to you before, particularly if you are working in a regulated environment like finance or in life science, it's really important as well that you consider, checks which you need to have in order to make sure that risks are properly assessed, right? And risk needs to be assessed already at the idea stage, because you need to understand what process is actually there, and is there an impact to existing controls or some other implications. And at the same time, you need as well at the time of the code development, be able to check off that everything's been done according to standard. There's no hard-coded passwords there. Everything is neutralized, and there is no risk coming in because of someone having coded things wrongly or potentially causing havoc in a productive environment such as SAP. So from that perspective, very important that in that governance structure between all parties, that is the citizen developer, the COE, the risk and controls team, the process excellence team members, which are then as well going to look into the feasibility and viability of an automation in a different process set, are properly checked off. And IT has as well given the blessing that the structure is going to be producing safe and secure results.
I think the last question I have is, can you give me your top two advice for SMEs, like small medium enterprises or large enterprises, looking to invest in building their own in-house citizen developer program?
Well, there's many different advices one could give, right? But I think if you're thinking about small and medium businesses, but even large enterprises, really, I think the first thing you could actually do to get started is really pilot. And right, just take two or three of the usual suspects, the tech-savvy folks you have in some of the business units, and really have them trained. And with that, see what the potential is, because that's going to really give you a wider horizon of what the opportunity is they could potentially unlock if you would scale this really across the organization. So getting started means really getting into a pilot mode and really understanding what it can actually do for you. But if we're looking at just let's say the concept in general, I think that for me, what is really important is that you're very clear what the purpose is of citizen development. What are they going to serve? Because if your expectation is that they're going to do massive savings in terms of productivity and hours, that's probably not where they're going to be. But what they're going to do is work really on areas where there's not been much effort yet. And at the same time, they're going to be that change agent network, which I was mentioning to you before, who's going to help you as well with adoption of automation across all different types. So from that perspective, be really clear what you want to use them for and give them the necessary time. This was one of the things which has come back from most of the citizen developers I've talked about as the top number one challenge. They seem not always to get sufficient time to keep on their development activities and be engaged. So be very clear about that from the start. You'll need to carve out time, you need to commit to it so that people are able then to really be that driving force which you're actually looking for creating.
Thank you. We are close to the hour. We've gone a minute over the hour. So, how can people reach out to you?
Well, you already mentioned it before. I'm very present on LinkedIn, so you can find my profile under Pedro Berrocoso. You can leave a comment on one of my posts. If you're interested, just follow me there on my profile. You can hit the bell or send me directly a message if there's something interesting you want to know about citizen development or automation in general.
For our listeners and our watchers, a full transcription will be available on my website, rpajargonbuster.com. And also, if you needed someone to talk to about intelligent automation for SMEs and mid-markets, feel free to reach out to me through my website as well, or our email address, info@rpajargonbuster.com. And until next time, stay informed.